Welcome to a new edition of 805 Sports Talk, and this week we're going to start with the big news from Righetti High School. Tony Payne is the Warriors' new head football coach. Payne spent 4 years as Orcutt Academy's head football coach at the 8-man level, but he's kind of taken a step up to lead the Warriors as they move into the Central section. Personally seeing the reaction from the community, it sounds like everyone's really excited about this hire. Everybody is really think this is the right direction to go. We heard a couple weeks ago when Ed Herman was let go over there at Righetti that Tony Payne was going to be one of the top candidates, and it's no surprise that he was announced as the coach on Tuesday. Kenny, we'll start with you. What was your initial reaction to the hire? You spoke to him yesterday. You got a little bit of reaction from Tony. What are your first thoughts on that hire?
No surprise that he was hired. He seemed like the perfect fit. I mean, he loves Righetti. He graduated from Righetti. He's a big. I think he did have some mixed emotions about taking Ed over from Ed Herman. Ed did a very good job last year getting them to the playoffs after 1-9 in 2016. But I think Tony will be an excellent fit. He's a believer in the wing T, which is the system they have. He seems like a player's coach, yet discipline-wise, he seemed to run a pretty tight ship. He's at Orcutt Academy. A player's coach, yet the players respected him. I think it was a fine fit. Good guy, good coach. I think it was a winner all the way around.
All right, Elliot, you're kind of our 8-man expert, and Tony really familiarized himself with that 8-man ball. Now he's going to Righetti. He spent some time there last year as the O-line coach. What are your thoughts on that move, and what do you think some things Tony Payne needs to do to kind of get that program stabilized and headed in the right direction?
Well, that's a good question. He needs to bring some continuity. We saw that with Santa Maria years ago, not that many years ago. When Dan Ellington went there, they needed to bring somebody in that would stay there and bring a program in, and they could start to build. And I think he needs to do the same thing. He's got experience. He's been an offensive and defensive line coach. He took, after 4 years, he was the very first ever coach at Orcutt Academy in 8-man. He did a good job there, got him to the playoffs in 3 of those years, including the first year. So he proved that he could lead a program. He took a year off and has been with Righetti ever since, and he's works with the track team. He's a throwers coach. I just saw him at the track meet the other day in the shot put and discus, and he's still involved with a lot of these football players because they're part of that, and strength and conditioning is big with him. But he brings experience. He might bring a little unpredictability. There was a point where he had lined up 2 quarterbacks at Orcutt Academy, so he, with a wing T and with a little bit of creativity, he could throw you off your game. So, and again, if they bring some stability to the program, then I think he could do a good job. He's got all the credentials you need. He's not only a graduate there, but of Righetti High School, but he was a teacher there. He went to Hancock under Barney Eames. He was a player. He's got everything you need. Now let's see if he can just stick it out, and which I think he will. I think he'll be there as long as he wants. Hopefully the school will want him too. Nobody really wanted to see the change in coaches, but they did it, so we wish him the best, and I think he'll do a good job. And remember, he's got kids like Brandon Giddings coming back, and he's been with the program, so he's not starting from scratch. He's like he did at Orcutt Academy. They started from nothing because they didn't exist.
He literally got that program up and running himself.
He's got some pieces to build on. He's got the kids' confidence already. So it's a popular choice, and I think he'll do a wonderful job.
All right, Lorenzo, and Righetti's moving into kind of a new era, Central Section, different league. Do you think he needs to be familiar with that new Central Section? Do you think that's going to have an impact? Do you think the road might be a little bit easier playing in the Central Section? What do you think the future holds for Tony Payne and Righetti over there?
One of the things I feel like Payne will put a big emphasis on is going to be the weight room. He's going to get his guys hitting the weights really hard, especially going against much bigger schools, especially in that, I believe it's a Division II realm that they're heading into, which means they're going to be going against Tulare, they're going to be going against Danuba, they're going to be going against El Diamante, all the heavyweights in the Tulare-Visalia area. And I know from experience that they got a lot of size, a lot of meat out in those parts now. I mean, as far as Payne coming into Righetti, I mean, it's a terrific hire because he's a Righetti guy. He knows the expectations, and you mentioned Brendan Giddings as one of his key players coming back. Let's remember he gets Caleb Thomas coming back as well. So he already has the Pac-5 MVP to work with. And, I mean, I'm sure Payne's phone is already blowing up with college coaches wanting to know more about Caleb Thomas. But, you know, those are two very solid building blocks for Payne's first team.
Yeah, and I think this is the direction Righetti was kind of planning on going from the outset with Payne. I know he interviewed Monday. I think Mike Regan also interviewed for the job, so it might be interesting to see if Mike will get back into the coaching realm over here on the Central Coast. But they moved pretty swiftly, getting Tony Payne in there, and he's going to move quickly as well. He was in the weight room yesterday getting those guys ready, and you mentioned how he's really adamant about the weight room. He's a guy that gets in the weight room. He's probably 6'6", 6'7", big offensive line type, so I think the offensive line will improve. That might be a good thing for Caleb Thomas, a bigger guy, having a coach who's kind of have experience being a bigger guy and competing at an elite level. Tony played in college as well, so maybe Caleb Thomas will get even better this year, with some experience, more experience from Tony Payne, a lot of experience with that offensive line. Maybe they'll keep the wing T, I guess, is kind of what the feeling we got yesterday with hearing from Tony Payne. So, and I think they needed someone who has a little bit of innovation there, some new, young, energetic blood. A lot of coaches in the area kind of, recycle, and you see a lot of the same names. Tony Payne did well at Orcutt Academy, but now he's got a chance to kind of, leave an imprint on his alma mater, which everyone loves to do that.
Caleb Thomas has a head coach he can relate to. I mean, he's a lineman, and now his new head coach is a lineman himself and a former Righetti High lineman standout. So, match made in heaven to me.
All right, moving over to basketball. I think we are officially through with covering basketball with Cabrillo losing last weekend and Hancock also falling. So, we're full on into the spring season, but we're going to wrap up Cabrillo's season. Lorenzo, you saw them win a state game last week, and then they lost in the next round against a Sunny Hills team that they had beaten in the Southern Section semifinals. Were you a little surprised to see that result Saturday night with Cabrillo losing?
I was more surprised by this number Kenny gave me. I believe it was 2 of 13 from the free throw line. I mean, I know that free throw shooting has been sort of like the kryptonite of Cabrillo High, but to see it fall that bad, especially deep in the playoffs, I mean, I don't know what conversations Jared McCune had with his team, but I'm sure that was a topic of discussion with his girls, because if they make all those free throws, or even maybe even half of those, they would have at least won this game by 1. So, I mean, there was that, but, it was a really remarkable year for Cabrillo. I mean, all those years of becoming this heavyweight powerhouse in this area, and then to finally see a state run under the watch of Jared McCune, and also with Erin Jenkins in her 4th year at the varsity level, also get a chance to experience the state playoffs. I mean, it was still a very, very strong year for Cabrillo, and I'm sure this will only infuse a lot more enthusiasm for young girls who are picking up a basketball for the first time in the North Lompoc Valley. I would imagine that there's going to be even more interest now more than ever to play for Cabrillo because of the run the Cogs had.
Yeah, and I think it's got to be kind of a weird feeling for Coach McCune. You talked about it before the season even began. They were focused on making the state tournament, but to get so close to a CIF Southern Section Championship, you felt a good seeding in the state playoffs, facing a team you beat in the Southern Section semifinals. You wish you had a little bit more, and both of their playoff losses were in overtime, so if you're Cabrillo, you were so close to really, making it a truly historic season. You went to places you've never been before as a program this season, but you were so close to bringing home a championship, so close to advancing even deeper into those state playoffs. I think you are left a little bit, wondering what could have been, but, we're going to try to focus on those positives, and I think you're right that it's going to kind of continue and build. They do lose some pieces with Erin Jenkins going away. Brittany McCune was lost for the season. They're losing a big chunk of that team, but we saw a lot of good young pieces this year. Alexa McCune looked good. I think Jessie Jenkins is going to be one heck of a player, be pretty similar to her sister, when she gets a little bit older. Kenny, you saw Saturday night's game. What was it, the free throw shooting that really stuck out to you? Reading some of your quotes from McCune, it seemed like he was a little frustrated with some of the officiating the last couple of games, in that final and then in the state playoff game. What did you kind of take away from that?
Usually, frankly, I don't have a lot of sympathy for people who complain about the officiating, but I thought Jared had some valid complaints. I mean, sometimes I thought slight contact was called, and then some very heavy contact was not called. I mean, the Sunny Hills post player, who is a good post player, she went hard into the back of a Cabrillo player, and Jared was upset about it, and no foul was called. Cabrillo kept possession of the ball, and the official kind of laughed at Jared when Jared made his complaint. But I mean, that's one thing I don't think it's called enough anymore anyway, the the back call. But anyway, but yes, I thought he did have some valid complaints about the officiating. It was no official's fault that Cabrillo went 2 for 13 from the foul line, and he knows that. And he did say they hadn't shot free throws that bad all year. I thought they did quite well to get as far as they did without a lot of offensive firepower. Jenkins was really the only player who consistently scored in double figures for them after Brittany McCune went out. And Brittany went out, the 5th game of the season or something like that.
It was against Righetti.
And they lost a key defender, Kiki Dial. So they did well to get where they're at, but they should have done a little better offensively, even with the absence of Brittany McCune, I thought.
Elliot, how would you kind of sum up how things went for Cabrillo?
I think they easily exceeded everybody's expectations. When you look at, they had to play most of the season without Brittany McCune. Erin Jenkins carried that team as far as she could, but in the loss to Warren in the Southern Section Finals, she fouled out in overtime. Both of these games went to overtime, and she fouled out in the 4th quarter of the game that eventually they lost in overtime to Sunny Hills. So if you had Brittany McCune, it would have taken some of the pressure off of Erin Jenkins, and she might not have fouled out, or if she had fouled out, you'd have had another go-to player. That's where it hurt them. In these final 2 games, they were just one woman short, and that's the way I looked at it. And I agreed with the coach. I don't know that they got the greatest calls, but you got to play the hand you're dealt, and if the officials are calling the game, you don't like it, then you just tell your girls to back off a little bit or watch the fouls. But they lost Jenkins to foul trouble in both games, and at that point I thought they were doomed.
You know, what I do appreciate from Coach McCune was his honesty in his interviews. You know, a lot of times coaches would give you that kind of company line where, I can't really complain about the officiating, but he was upset and he voiced his opinion, which is cool to see. We always appreciate some honesty and, some good quotes when we're interviewing people.
I think Elliot has a point, though. Yes, I thought Jared has some valid complaints, but if you think the game is being called unreasonably tightly at defense, back off a little. Don't try to get that hand check in. Don't try to maybe necessarily always get that body on the ball handler if you're going to get called for that.
And in my experience of being in the Wampanoag Valley and covering both girls and boys basketball, I could sit here and say there are numerous and a lot of questionable officiating calls, not just that occurred with McCune, but even for Claudia Terrones as well. There was numerous calls on both of their ends that, it made you scratch your head, wonder why would they call that?
Well, you see it in all the games and all the sports. Sometimes you're left scratching your head, but both teams are playing with those same officials. Mm-hmm. So you've got to watch, and coaches got to look and say, well, all right, they're calling this tight or they're calling this loose, and adjust. I mean, it's part of the game. We hear coaches, even recently I've talked to coaches that said last night at a volleyball match, the Pioneer Valley coach took his team aside after they lost the first set to St. Joseph and said, we got to do this differently. And they did, and then they swept the next 3 sets. So that's part of what you're doing as a coach. And maybe if he'd pulled Erin Jenkins off the floor a little earlier in the first half, she wouldn't have had as many fouls. Or
he did have to sit her some in the first half.
Yeah, so but if he'd done a little bit earlier, maybe it would have prevented a problem, or if he told him to back off. So, the coach is part of the team too, even though he's not necessarily on the floor. He controls to a large degree what's going on the floor, so that's part of their job too. So, both teams are playing with the same referees, and sometimes, the team you support, the parents of that team often feel like their kids are getting a number done on them. That the referee's favoring the other team. And I'm sure the parents from the other team are saying, oh, the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
And I've heard it
both
in
times.
hundreds, thousands of games at high school and college and pro level. The other guys are the bad guys, and they're getting the calls. Well, sometimes it may be true, you know. In the pro basketball, they're always talking about the Michael Jordan advantage, that he wouldn't get called for any of the fouls that everybody else gets called for. But I don't know that these kids are such big stars that the referees
None of
are
these
going to give them.
teenagers have that kind of thing
Yeah,
going for
and
them.
Aaron Jenkins' advantage. So.
Yeah, moving on to a sport that really isn't affected too much by officiating, track and field. Got to give a shout out to some big time performers so far this track season. Joseph Dominguez has just had a huge 2018 in general. Had a big winter season during the kind of indoor season, basically what they call the winter season is kind of like the indoor season for track and field. And then the track and field spring season has just been huge for him at the in Ballpark High at the Tri-County meet. Set a meet record. Also won the 1600. I think he's undefeated in both the 8 and 16 this year. Tripled at the city meet a couple weeks ago. That's the third year in a row for him that he's tripled at the city meet. Just kind of unheard of things for him. I know we had high expectations for Joseph Dominguez before he was even in high school with some of the middle school, junior high stuff he was doing. We weren't sure which high school he was going to go to, but he's kind of maybe even exceeded expectations, how he's hit his stride this year. Kenny, you've been following him for a long time. Have you been impressed with Joseph Dominguez? Has he kind of surpassed what you thought you would see from him as a high school student athlete? How do you feel about what Joseph has done this year and the previous 2 years at the high school level?
I think toward the end of last year, he started to exceed my expectations a bit. He won. He was a county champion. He qualified for the sectional finals in the 1600. Won his heat in the prelims. Where he's really surprised me actually is how fast his 800 times have been. 157. I'm pretty sure that's a PR for him already. I mean, this early in the season, you hope that he's not peaking a little early, but if I were him, I'd be encouraged. Especially that 800 time popped out to me. He's hit a 157 already.
Yeah, I'm surprised his 800 is that good with how well he does run in the 16 and the 32. You don't see a lot of those really middle distance and distance runners who compete at that level, so I think it's impressive. You saw him receive his award at the roundtable. What was your takeaway from him getting that award in just a season he's had?
Very well-spoken guy, also very humble, even though some of his teammates are already calling him a legend in St. Joseph War. So, but this actually isn't the first time I got a chance to see a track athlete actually compete at a high level in both of those events. I mean, Emmanuel had a young man named Kesey Nevelbard who was a multiple state qualifier. So it makes me wonder if Dominguez is capable of going over to Buchanan once it's June and it's triple digits.
I could see that, and of course he's still just a junior, so I think he's going to definitely be a state qualifier in at least the 800. Who knows? But I could definitely see that from him as well. So congrats to him. He's had a great year, and I think it's going to continue. There's still a whole lot of big events to go with the county meet, league finals and all that stuff. So it's still a huge event to go for him. And Sarah Perkins from Santa Ynez, she was a double winner at the Tascadero meet. She was a female athlete of the week winner, so congrats to her as well. And I think looking at some of those times from phototiming.com from that Tascadero meet, I was impressed. Lompoc had a lot of top performers over there, and you wrote up a little something on the Braves. What did you see from the Braves and some of those standouts?
There's so many impact athletes on that Braves track and field team, and I mean, Shamar Savage continues to amaze as a track athlete. I mean, we talk about him being this dominant football player. He's equally dominant in the track spikes. Cassidy Cunningham, I did hear that she actually injured herself during the week. I don't know what her status will be for the rest of the year, but, when she's on the track, I mean, she's equally impressive as well. And, even Wanda Luna. I mean, we hear about Wanda Luna, like, shoving around offensive linemen. Well, he's shoving the shot put and discus, and he's actually doing it very well for Lompoc also.
Yep, and we're going to be covering track hopefully this week if the weather holds up. There's some big track meets ahead.
Today it's supposed to go. So.
Definitely. And moving to Hancock, they lost Friday in the Elite Eight of the state tournament. One of the last 8 teams standing. Congrats to them. City College of San Francisco, that was a tough matchup. That's a really good team. A lot of size, a lot of advantages, but Hancock was right there for most of the game. They just weren't able to find, I think, some consistency on offense with that length and size advantage San Francisco had. It was real tough for Shane Carney and company to find open lanes and score. Kenny, you followed that game. You think it was about what you expected from them? Did you think they might get in there and make it a little bit closer? Would you want a little bit more out of them? What did you take away from that performance?
I thought they thought they had a chance. They had an early lead. I thought, they're 4 for 4. They're not going to keep this up. They're off to a good start. But the thing was, the first half, I thought they did about everything they could offensively, and they were still down by 8. And frankly, the second half, they just fell apart offensively at times. As mentioned, CCSF is athletic. They play long. I think the game complexion changed when CCSF went to a full court press. Hancock just had a lot of trouble creating openings, and sometimes Hancock would double dribble against the pressure. And when the thing to do to try to beat that kind of pressure is to get the ball in the air quick to the open player. They averaged around 91 points, but for all that, I thought San Francisco really won the game with their defense, at least when they switched their defensive look. And for how briskly they played, San Francisco only had 6 turnovers, which I thought was very impressive. I mean, they outscored Hancock 22-0 in points off turnovers. So and bench outscored Hancock's 30-10. Hancock never did have the deepest bench.
And watching that live feed, I mean, just the description that I was given from San Francisco City is that it's pretty much a Mountain West Conference team with the talent that they have. And as it is, they had a lot of Mountain West targets on that roster. But, it's a huge credit to Tyson I for what he's been able to do at Hancock. And I mentioned this in my recent column. Hancock, realistically, none of their guys are considered household names on the recruiting trail. I mean, Shane Carney is getting NCAA Division II interest, and he was an all-state performer.
Yes, congrats to Shane for making that all-state team, and being an undersized guy and being able to score like he's been able to the last couple of years was good, and all he's overcome, we talked about it a lot, so congrats to him to making the all-state team. Yeah, and Hancock might have one Division I guy, and I think Spirit Ricks has kind of drawn some interest, and he was injured, and I think
that hurt them some.
That injury was huge. Shamar Parker tried to fill that role, I think, as much as he could, and he was kind of winded in that game, but I think Shamar did fill in admirably with hitting some shots and being able to play.
And Parker was considered he was labeled a left tackle by the announcer, the play-by-play commentators.
Yeah, and he's I think the lone local guy over there for Santa Maria High grad. Played football, made a state run in the basketball season, so that was cool to see. And he was an effective guy. You kind of think he'd just be the last guy on the bench that's just there, kind of for a cool story to play football and basketball. But he was the first guy off the bench, so that was cool. Elliot, how would you kind of wrap up the season, and should we expect more of these state runs from Tyson I's program over there?
I think so. I think I's a good coach, and now he's built some continuity. He's showed the kids that they belong. You talk about only one local player on the court, on the bench, but Tyson I has kind of stockpiled a whole bunch of guys that were red shirt freshmen, or I think it's called gray shirt freshmen, that are getting up their grades.
There are about 10 of them.
So and they came out to practice. They apparently are allowed to practice, and they're learning his system. So they'll have a year under their belt, and some of those guys are tall. They got the Carpenter twins from Orcutt Academy, the wide receivers from there, and one was a part-time quarterback. They got some talent, they got some athleticism, and they've got a year of experience that doesn't count against their eligibility. So he's sort of stockpiled a deep bench for next year, and it's junior college. You can't keep them for more than 2 years on the court.
Unless they're injured.
Yeah,
like
Shane Carney,
was.
right. But so they can't play when they're red-shirted or gray-shirted, but he gets 2 years of active roster. He's going to lose some kids. He can fill in a whole lot of blanks, And I think now that he's been around for a few years, I can just reload from what he's already got in his red and gray shirt class.
And Spirit Ricks is a freshman, so
Yeah.
chances are he'll be
got some
back
good-
next year.
I mentioned the level of enthusiasm now for Cabrillo girls basketball. I would imagine the level of enthusiasm for potentially playing at Hancock is now going to be at an all-time high among the local kids here.
Men's and women. The women's team only had one woman from out of state, and one from outside the Central Coast area, and then their center was from Paso Robles, which was about as far as any of them were from campus. So, Larry Carney over there has a whole lot of local girls, and he's going from high school to high school. So I think you're going to see more local interest in both
And
programs.
they're trying to court Danielle Morgan to come to Hancock. So
They're courting everybody that's any good. They'll go, they'll go after Aaron Jenkins. They'll go after Brittany McCune. They'll go after Zane Sheckard. I'm not saying they're going to get him,
Zane's already signed, so.
but they're
Aaron's already signed too.
Yeah,
but they're
so is
letting
Ashley
everybody
Reynoso.
know they're welcome in Santa Maria and on the campus of Hancock College.
And El Padilla Allan over at Northwest Nazarene University, she's all over Aaron. I mean, she would ask me like, "Hey, how's Aaron doing? How's Cabrillo doing?" So it goes to show NNU wants Aaron.
All right, that's all we got for this week. Thank you guys for tuning in for 805 Sports Talk.